Okay, so in this activity, what we're going to learn to do is how to use our CO2 sensor. This is one of the more expensive sensors. It's upwards of around $40 to $60 depending on when we get it. It also works in the I2C, and it's got a SCD41 label, which is going to be important because we're going to need to find its extension, but we actually already have it installed if we have installed the Grove Shield. And again, it works on an I2C port, so we're going to plug in a cable, and I'm just going to plug it into one of my I2C hubs again. So I'm just adding it to my already existing set of materials. And again, I've got my LED strip unplugged again right now because that's what's draining a lot of the power, so that just keeps me from having any power issues. The other thing I'm also going to undo for right now is I am going to unplug my real-time clock if you've already got it plugged in, just so that I won't have an alarm go off because I've got that in. Or you can take out the call alarm in the forever loop that we put in one of our previous sessions, and that will also prevent our real-time clock from going off. Okay, so let's add a new data collection block to our get data. So let's go find our get data function. There it is. Okay. And first thing I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to create a new variable because I need someplace to store the data that's coming in. So I'm going to call this one CO2. Very simple, for carbon dioxide. Okay. There we go. All right, and now I'm going to take that set CO2 down to my bottom of my get data. And now if I go to Grove, you will see as we scroll down, we've got a bunch of new sensors blocks that are added here. But there is our CO2 temperature and humidity sensors. Okay, you have to make sure you pick the right one. And that's why it was important that we noticed that it was an SCD41 sensor. So I'm going to read the CO2 from that. And notice it's also got temperature, humidity, and I can change Celsius to Fahrenheit as well, so I can choose what I want to read. So if you only had the CO2 sensor, you could also use it to measure temperature and humidity as well, and you wouldn't need the AHT sensor anymore because it reads humidity and temperature. But the cost difference is the AHT sensor usually runs somewhere between $5 to $10 tops. This one runs $40 to $60 for the CO2, so there's a big difference. Okay, so unless you really have a reason to use CO2, right, it's an expensive sensor. Okay, so now what I want to do is I am going to head back over into my show loop, and I am going to put in the same type of blocks that I've done in the before. So I'm going to do a show new line of string. I'm going to put it to someplace in the middle here. It doesn't really matter. And I'm going to call this CO2. I'm going to do a new show line number. And notice I've already got my CO2 there. And I am going to insert a new line. Okay, so that gets me below the CO2. So I'm going to have a little space here for the rest of them. All right. Let's see. And if I wanted to do something, right, I could come back and create another control light, say with my CO2 if I wanted to. But I think for the most part, unless we have a CO2 reading that is really bizarre, is that we might not do a lot of controls with it. And now I'm just going to download my code. Let's wait for it to collect it up or connect up to my microbit. There it goes. There's the beep. There's the file. Okay, I'm going to download it, pair it up, connecting my microbit. Alright, I'm going to be downloading. Perfect. Okay, unplug. Let's plug this in. Now on my screen, I should get my CO2 level. Now there's one thing to note with my CO2 is it takes a while for the CO2 sensor to stabilize. So oftentimes when you first plug it in, you're probably going to get a number that is way off the mark. And so right now, like, my CO2 reading is 2,658, which is really high. And so if you wait about 10 minutes, it will stabilize. It just takes a while for the little CO2 sensor to warm up. You probably, in a classroom setting, you're probably going to end up getting readings somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 1,000. Kind of depends on how well the ventilation is operating in your room. So I'm going to let this set here for a little bit. And while we're waiting, I'm going to add stuff to my data collection block here, because now I've got some new data that I can add in. I can add a new column. I'm going to add this as CO2 here, and I can get my variable by doing CO2, right? I also now have a soil moisture reading, right, from before in my code here. So I'm going to go up to my variables, and I'm going to add soil moisture. Okay, and let's see, is there any other variables that I want to add? I think that might be it. All right, perfect. And again, I could verify my readings coming from my AHT is right, but otherwise I am okay. I think over here I'm going to do one little fix to my CO2. I'm going to put a little equal sign right there and a space, just to make it space out when I download it again, make it a little easier to read on my screen. Okay, so now my CO2 reading is down to 2,600, so it's heading down, but again, it takes it a bit. Okay, and so now I've got a better data logging feature, and again, you can use your CO2 to send a warning. You could have like a little beep or something play, or something to let you know that your CO2 level is too high. And usually your CO2 levels are high if it's in a controlled or a tight space and you have lots of students breathing. You can actually breathe on it, cause it to go high, and have an alarm go off and things like that. But in most situations, you probably want to have your high reading set at about 1,000, because most settings it's going to end up being around 800 in most classroom settings. Alright, I'm going to download this again. Oh, I got to plug it in. I forgot to do that. And just remember is that you don't have to have your microbit plugged into your computer when it's running, which is great, because once the program is on your microbit, it is transferred and running on the bit. All it needs is power. Okay, so it's transferred, so I'm going to unplug it, plug it back into my shield. And we'll wait for things to warm up. There's, I got my little red dot on my CO2. See if my CO2 sensor has changed any. Okay, now my CO2 sensor is in better shape. It's warmed up a bit. It's now 709 as my reading, 679. Okay, so that's a good reading. That's typically what you'll end up, right? Our reading in the actual atmosphere is now, what, somewhere between 460 and 480, something like that. But in a classroom setting, it's going to be a little higher. Okay, just because we have people and students breathing in classrooms, all that CO2. But that's it for the CO2 sensor.